I found out my son got married last Saturday. Not from him, not from an invitation, but from a photograph that someone else posted online. A photograph that stopped my world cold. There he was, my Ethan, standing under an arch of white roses, holding hands with a woman in lace. Smiling, no, beaming, like a man who'd never known pain in his life. And beside him, rows of people I didn't recognize. Friends, colleagues, faces I'd never seen. They all looked so happy. Everyone, except me, because I wasn't there. I sat on my porch that evening, staring at the photo until the sun went down. The shadows stretched long across the wooden boards. The cicadas started their endless song, and I just stared. I didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't even breathe for a while. It took me a few minutes to notice the caption beneath the photo. Finally tied the knot with my forever girl, the best day of our lives. Our. The word hit me harder than anything else, because for the first time in my life, our didn't include me. There were no texts, no calls, no, "Mom, I have something to tell you." Just a celebration of love that erased the woman who raised him. It's strange how betrayal doesn't sound like breaking glass. It sounds like silence. Long, heavy, deliberate silence. When you raise a child alone, you learn to read absence like language. You hear the distance before it speaks. And that night, it screamed. I looked around my small house, the walls covered in photos of his childhood, drawings he made when he was 6, birthday cards that said, "To the best mom ever." Every memory felt like a cruel joke now, as if the years had conspired to make me look foolish. He was my only son, my only family, and I had built my entire world around the idea that one day he would come back, that all the money I'd sent, all the help I'd given, all the patience I'd endured through his coldness would mean something. But when he stood at that altar, he didn't look like the boy I'd raised. He looked like a stranger wearing his face. I don't remember when the tears started, only that they came without sound, soft, like a confession whispered into the dark. And somewhere in between one heartbeat and the next, grief gave birth to something I hadn't felt in years. Anger, not loud or wild, but sharp, clean and quiet. The next morning, I made coffee and checked again. The photos had multiplied. There was a video now. People laughing, clapping, her tossing the bouquet. And in the background, I spotted something that almost made me drop my mug. Mara's mother was there. Mara's friends. Her cousins. Even her co-workers. Everyone. Except me. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a message. They didn't forget to invite me. They chose not to. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages. The last one from Ethan was 6 weeks old. "Hey, Mom, can you help with the rent again, just for this month?" I had sent the money without hesitation. Because that's what mothers do, we give. Even when it empties us, we trust. Even when the voice in our head whispers not to. We hope, even when it hurts. But this time, something inside me shifted. For 71 years, I had been the helper, the fixer, the provider. And what did it earn me? A seat nowhere near his happiness. I thought about calling him. Then I thought about what I would say. Would I beg for an explanation? Would I scold him like the child he used to be? No. I decided to do what he'd done to me. I stayed silent. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark. The TV murmured in the background, but I wasn't listening. I stared at the faint reflection of my face in the window. Old, tired, but not defeated. And I whispered, more to myself than to the empty room, "You may have forgotten your mother, Ethan, but you've just reminded her who she really is." For years, I'd lived for him, but from that moment on, I started living for me. Still, as I set down my glass, I couldn't help but wonder, what could make a son erase his own mother from the happiest day of his life? Was it shame? Was it control? Or had I raised him too well? So well that he learned how to take without giving back. Whatever the reason, I knew one thing. The next time he needed me, I wouldn't be the same woman who always said yes. She's hurt, humiliated, and haunted by the question, why? But the quiet fury stirring inside her will soon find its purpose. And when her son and his wife come back asking for more, they'll meet someone they no longer recognize. People often assume betrayal happens all at once, like lightning striking out of nowhere. But I know better. It starts as a drizzle, small, harmless, almost invisible, until one day you look up and the storm has swallowed your whole sky. When I was younger, I thought love meant giving everything you had and never keeping score. I thought motherhood was measured in sacrifice, not boundaries. And Ethan, my boy, he was the reason I breathed. After my husband died, Ethan became my world. He was only 12. I remember holding his hand at the funeral, promising him that no matter what, he would never have to face this world alone. I kept that promise, even when it nearly broke me. I worked as a librarian by day and a caretaker at night. 2 jobs, 1 purpose, to keep him afloat. Every paycheck stretched thin, every dream deferred. But when you're a mother, you don't count hours or dollars. You count the ways you can make your child's life softer than yours was. Ethan was bright, brilliant even. He had a smile that could melt granite and a charm that could open any door. He used to hug me so tight, whispering, "When I grow up, I'll buy you a big house, Mama. You won't have to work anymore." And I believed him. Because children don't lie when they're small. They just grow into people who forget what truth sounds like. The first time he asked for money, he was 19, a college freshman with unexpected expenses. I sent it immediately. Then came another call 2 weeks later. "Just for textbooks, Mom, I'll pay you back." He never did, and I never asked, because it felt cruel to remind him that kindness costs something. After graduation, he moved in with Mara. I remember the first time I met her, pretty, confident, sharp as a blade hidden under silk. She called me Miss Clara instead of Mom, even though I told her she didn't have to. She smiled politely and said, "Let's not rush things." I should have seen it then. The careful distance. The way she watched me like I was a puzzle she didn't intend to solve. Ethan started changing after that. Less phone calls, shorter visits, excuses that grew legs. And then came the money again. Bigger amounts this time. First it was a down payment, then a medical emergency. Then help with rent just until Mara's business picks up. And each time I told myself it was temporary, because that's what love does. It keeps lying to itself in the name of hope. In 3 years, I sent over $38,000. Every transfer a tiny piece of my security handed over in faith. Sometimes I glance at my savings account and whisper, "That's fine, he'll pay it back." But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. He wasn't cruel, just careless. He didn't mean to hurt me. He simply didn't think I could be hurt. Mara, on the other hand, she knew exactly what she was doing. She was polite, but transactional. Every word measured. Every favor strategic. She'd text me sweet little messages like, "We're so lucky to have you." But "we" only existed when they needed something. When I once hinted that I might not be able to keep helping, her reply was immediate. "Ethan told me you'd always be there for him. You're not going to change that now, are you?" No question mark. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. As the years passed, the conversations grew colder. Ethan stopped calling on birthdays. Mara sent digital cards instead, cheap animations with glittering fonts that somehow felt like insults. When I'd visit, I noticed my things slowly disappearing. The teacup I'd given them, my late husband's photo, even the old quilt I'd made for Ethan when he was a boy. It was as if they were erasing me one piece at a time. Still, I told myself it was fine. Because that's what mothers do. We make excuses for the ones we love, even when the evidence of their indifference is staring us in the face. Until one day, the silence stopped being comfortable. It started to ache. The calls came only when bills were due. The love yous always arrived right after, "Can you send?" And I began to realize something terrifying. Somewhere along the line, I had trained them to use me. I had taught them that my love had no limits, no terms, no price. And they learned that lesson well. The last time I saw Ethan before the wedding that wasn't mine, he stopped by to borrow $1,000. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where he once did homework while I cooked dinner. But the man sitting across from me wasn't my son anymore. He was someone colder, calculated, impatient. When I hesitated, he sighed and said, "Mom, it's just money. You can't take it with you." I remember laughing, soft, sad, incredulous, because I suddenly realized he already had. He'd been taking it with him all along. That night, I stared at my checkbook and whispered a promise to myself. If they ever ask again, I will say no. But old habits die hard, because when love is wired to give, refusal feels like a sin. I didn't know it yet, but that small promise, that quiet rebellion, would become my salvation. Because soon they would come back asking for more. And this time, I wouldn't be the same woman who said yes. Her son's betrayal runs deeper than neglect. It's been years in the making. But when he and Mara return, demanding control over her money and her life, they'll discover that the woman they thought was weak has finally woken up. It was 2 weeks after the wedding that wasn't mine when the phone rang. A simple, ordinary sound. But I swear, I felt it before I heard it. That familiar vibration, the kind that crawls up your spine because you already know it's trouble wearing a friendly tone. I glanced at the screen. Mara. For a moment, I just stared at her name glowing against the dark glass. The last time I'd heard her voice was months ago. Soft, syrupy, the kind of sweetness that left a bitter aftertaste. Part of me wanted to let it ring until it died, but curiosity won. It always does with people like me, the ones who hope even after hope has turned to ash. "Hello?" There was laughter in the background, loud, muffled, carefree. She must have been on speaker. "Clara, hi!" Her voice came through too bright, too cheerful, like a stranger calling from a commercial. "How are you?" I said nothing. She didn't wait for an answer. "So, funny thing, we're a little short this month. The rent came up faster than expected and Ethan's still waiting on a transfer. You know how these banks are." She chuckled, as if it were all a little misunderstanding between friends. I felt my pulse slow, steady, focused. For the first time, her words didn't sting. They sounded absurd, empty, rehearsed, tired. "You need money," I said flatly. "Well, yes, just this once. You've always been such a lifesaver. Ethan said you wouldn't mind." That was it. That was the sentence that cracked something open inside me. Ethan said you wouldn't mind. How many times had I lived that line? How many nights had I given, not because I wanted to, but because guilt had my signature memorized? I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I said something I'd never said before. "No." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "I said no, Mara." Her tone shifted, brittle around the edges. "Clara, we're family. We're your only family." "Are we?" I asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, family tells you when they're getting married." The silence that followed was beautiful, cold and clean. When she finally spoke, her voice was clipped. "That's not fair. The wedding was complicated. We couldn't invite everyone." I smiled to myself. "Yes, I saw the photos. Looked like you managed just fine without me." She exhaled sharply. "I don't like your tone. I don't like your entitlement." "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I leaned back in my chair. "I have paid your rent. Your bills, your emergencies. I've bought your peace of mind for years, Mara. But you and my son made it very clear I'm no longer part of your life. So no, I won't be part of your finances either." There was a stretch of silence so long I could hear her breathing, quick, irritated. Finally, she said, "You're overreacting." "No," I said softly. "I'm just waking up." She scoffed. "You're making a mistake, Clara. We'll talk when you've calmed down." And then she hung up. I sat there, phone still warm in my hand, and felt something extraordinary. Peace. Not joy, not relief, just stillness. Like a room that's finally been aired out after years of suffocation. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. The automatic transfer labeled EM Support, the one I'd set up years ago, stared back at me. I hovered over the Cancel button. For a second, guilt whispered, "You've always helped him. What if they really needed?" But another voice, steadier now, replied, "And who helped you when you needed someone?" I clicked Cancel. It felt like cutting a chain I hadn't realized I'd been dragging. The next morning, I woke up lighter. I brewed my coffee, watched the steam rise, and thought, so this is what freedom tastes like. Quiet and slightly bitter, but clean. Of course, I knew they'd be back. People who take never stop at one helping. They circle back when the well runs dry, pretending they came for love. And sure enough, 3 days later, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. Ethan. And behind him, Mara, arms crossed, expression cold. My pulse didn't quicken this time, I just smiled. They came to collect, but they didn't know I'd already changed the locks, on my door and on my heart. Ethan and Mara have arrived, smiling and scheming, but Clara isn't the same woman they once controlled. When they reveal what they really came for, her quiet defiance will turn into full-fledged war. The morning they showed up, the sky was gray, heavy and undecided, like it couldn't make up its mind whether to rain or clear. I took that as a sign. Storms don't just come from the clouds. Sometimes they come dressed in smiles. Through the peephole, I saw them. Ethan in a pressed shirt, trying too hard to look respectable, and Mara with that same pinched look of polite disgust she wore the day I first met her. She held a sleek leather folder against her chest, like a soldier cradling ammunition. I could have ignored the knock, but part of me wanted to see what kind of story they'd tell this time. So I opened the door. "Mom," Ethan said, stepping forward like he had every right to. "We were just in the neighborhood." Lies. They lived 45 minutes away. Mara smiled that brittle smile, eyes scanning my living room behind me like a vulture searching for meat. "Clara, you look lovely," she said. "We brought coffee." She held up 2 paper cups, the same way someone might hold flowers at a grave. I let them in, because you can't study a snake without letting it move. Ethan walked around like he owned the place, straightening photo frames, looking anywhere but at me. Mara stayed near the couch, setting down her coffee with care. There was a practiced energy about her, like someone rehearsing empathy. "So," I said finally, "what brings you here?" Mara opened her folder. "Just something we wanted you to look over, nothing serious." She pulled out a few sheets of paper and slid them toward me. I didn't touch them. "Go on," I said. Ethan cleared his throat. "We were talking the other night. You've worked so hard all your life, Mom. It's time someone looked after you." "Is that so?" He smiled like he was proud of the line. "You shouldn't be worrying about finances or, keeping track of things. You're not getting any younger." Mara jumped in smoothly. "Exactly. We just want to make sure your affairs are in order. That way, if something ever happens, Ethan can handle everything. Bills, property, accounts, so you can just relax." Her tone was sugary, her words poisonous. I glanced down at the document. Power of attorney. They'd come for ownership. Not of my love this time, but of my life. I looked up slowly, meeting Ethan's eyes. "Tell me something, son. Whose idea was this?" He hesitated. "It's just paperwork, Mom. Everyone does it." I smiled thinly. "Everyone with vultures for children, maybe." Mara's voice sharpened. "There's no need to be rude. We're trying to help you." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Help me? By taking control of everything I've worked for? By managing what you didn't earn?" Ethan sighed heavily, frustration creeping in. "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just practical." "And stealing is just survival, isn't it?" I said quietly. His expression changed, flickered for half a second with guilt before the arrogance returned. "You're overreacting." I pushed the papers back toward him. "You're underestimating me." Mara tried a different approach. "Clara, maybe you're feeling a little overwhelmed. You've been alone a long time. This would take the pressure off you." I stood up. "The only pressure I feel right now is the one you're applying." They stared at me like I'd spoken another language, and maybe I had, because for the first time in my life, my no didn't tremble. Ethan finally lost his patience. "Why are you making this difficult? We're just trying to protect what's ours," I cut him off. "Yours?" He froze. I stepped closer, my voice low, steady. "Nothing in this house, in that bank, or in my name belongs to you. I built it. I earned it. You've been borrowing pieces of my peace for years, and I'm done lending." Mara's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least the regret will be mine to keep." They exchanged a look, silent, furious communication. Then Ethan said coldly, "Fine, but don't come crying to us when you need help." I smiled. "You've never offered help, only bills." They left without slamming the door, too proud for that. But the air they left behind was thick with resentment. I stood in the quiet for a long while, then went to the front door and locked it. Then I changed the lock entirely. That night, as the rain finally came down outside, I made 3 phone calls. First to my lawyer, Marjorie, to review my will. Second, to the bank to secure my accounts. And third, to myself. A promise whispered in the dark. No more giving until I'm empty. No more love without limits. From now on, if they come for me, they'll find a woman ready. I knew then that it wasn't over. People like Ethan and Mara don't walk away defeated. They retreat, replan, and return with sharper claws. I could feel it in the rain pounding against the glass. Something worse was coming. But this time, they wouldn't find a door left open. They'd find a wall. "They thought they were protecting their future," I whispered. But all they were doing was burying their own. They failed to get her signature, but not for long. Their next move won't come with smiles or coffee. It'll come wrapped in lies and legal papers meant to destroy her reputation and steal her freedom. I didn't hear from them for almost 3 weeks after that morning. Not a call, not a text, not even a passive-aggressive voicemail from Mara pretending to check if I was doing okay. And for a while, the silence felt like peace. But peace is fragile when you've lived your life waiting for storms. Something in me knew this wasn't the end. It was the pause before impact. One Tuesday afternoon, I was pruning the hibiscus bushes by the porch when a white sedan pulled up to my driveway. 2 people stepped out, a man in a blazer, a woman with a clipboard. They looked official, too official. "Mrs. Clara Monroe?" the man asked. I straightened slowly. "Yes." "We're with Adult Protective Services," the woman said, flipping through her file. "We received a report regarding potential self-neglect and possible financial mismanagement." For a second, I just blinked at her, the words sounding foreign, heavy, stupid. Then I laughed, quiet, bitter, humorless. "Self-neglect?" "Yes, ma'am," she said. "We're required to follow up when someone expresses concern for an elderly person's well-being. According to the report, you've been showing signs of confusion, forgetfulness, and possible vulnerability to fraud." "Fraud," I repeated, the word sour in my mouth. And then it hit me. Ethan and Mara. They hadn't just wanted control of my finances, they wanted me declared incompetent so they could legally take everything. I invited the officers inside, because if they came looking for weakness, I'd show them strength. My home was spotless, every bill organized, every document labeled. My mind was sharper than it had been in years. I offered them coffee, answered every question calmly, even joked a little. The woman closed her clipboard after an hour. "Frankly, Mrs. Monroe, you seem perfectly capable to me." I smiled politely. "I've been capable for 71 years. It's only recently that my son decided to forget that." They nodded sympathetically. The man left his card on my table. "If they try anything further, call us. We've seen this kind of thing before." After they left, I sat in the quiet and let my hands tremble. Not from fear, from fury. That kind of betrayal changes the temperature of your blood. I wasn't angry that they tried to take my money. I was angry that they tried to erase my mind, the last thing I truly owned. That evening, I called Marjorie, my attorney, and told her everything. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, Clara, this isn't just manipulation, it's exploitation. We can fight this, but we need proof. Proof. That was something I could get. I started gathering everything, bank statements showing the money I'd sent over the years, text messages where Mara begged and guilted me, screenshots of Ethan's requests, his casual, "You'll always help me, right?" messages. Every transfer confirmation, every receipt. I put them all into a single binder. When I was done, it was thicker than a Bible, my own testament to misplaced love. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Legal stationery. Ethan's name printed neatly at the top. I opened it slowly, feeling each word like a knife sliding under skin. This is to inform you that Ethan Monroe and Mara Monroe have filed a petition for guardianship, citing concerns regarding your financial capacity and mental stability. I sat down hard. The world tilted. They were going to court to prove I was insane. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the living room until dawn, every step tracing back through years of love and disappointment, every bedtime story I'd read him, every meal I'd skipped so he could eat, every lie I'd told myself to justify his selfishness. They all came back, like ghosts watching from the corners of the room. And in the middle of it all, one thought echoed louder than the rest. They think you're weak, Clara. That's your advantage. So I decided to use it. Over the next few days, I played the role they expected. Soft, fragile, harmless. When Ethan called, oh yes, he called now, I answered sweetly. "Mom," he said, his voice rehearsed with concern. "We didn't want it to come to this. You've just been off lately." "Off?" I said quietly. "It's nothing bad," he continued quickly. "We're just trying to help. Once the paperwork's sorted, everything will be easier for you. You won't have to worry about anything." I smiled into the phone. "You're right, Ethan. Once this is over, I won't have to worry about anything." He didn't catch the edge in my tone. The hearing date came faster than I expected. I spent the night before sitting by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I thought about all the years I'd spent being afraid to say no, and how tomorrow I'd finally say it in front of the world. When I stood up to go to bed, I saw my reflection in the glass. My face was older, yes, but behind those tired eyes, something fierce had come alive again. "You tried to take my name, my dignity, my mind," I whispered. "Tomorrow, I'll take back everything you thought I'd lost." Ethan and Mara believe they've won. They'll walk into that courtroom smug and certain, convinced they've already buried her. But what they don't know is that Clara's coming armed, with proof, with purpose, and with a heart no longer afraid of breaking. Courtrooms are colder than they look on television, not just in temperature, in spirit. It's the kind of cold that doesn't come from air conditioning, but from judgment. That morning, as I sat there waiting for the hearing to start, I could feel it, the chill of strangers who already thought they knew my story. Across the aisle, Ethan and Mara sat side by side, whispering. He wore a dark suit, too formal for someone who claimed to be helping. She wore white, as if innocence could be sewn into fabric. They didn't look at me, and I didn't look away. The judge walked in, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could slice through excuses. She glanced at the paperwork, then at me. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, "this hearing is to determine whether you are mentally capable of managing your personal and financial affairs. Are you prepared to proceed?" I smiled politely. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been managing my life longer than either of them have been married." A ripple of laughter broke through the tension, but I didn't smile, because nothing about this was funny. Ethan's lawyer started first. He spoke with rehearsed pity, painting me as a fragile old woman, confused, forgetful, emotionally unstable. He even held up screenshots of text messages I'd sent years ago when I'd mixed up a payment confirmation. "Signs of early cognitive decline," he said. I sat still, hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending to listen. But inside, I was cataloging everything, every exaggeration, every lie, every time Ethan glanced at me like he was doing me a favor by destroying my name. Then came Mara's turn. She was an actress that day. Trembling voice, Moist eyes, every word dripping with concern. "She's been acting strange," she said softly. "Sometimes she calls multiple times in a day, forgetting what we talked about. She gets defensive when we try to help." The judge nodded slightly, taking notes. And then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling every pair of eyes in that room land on me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I just spoke. "Your Honor, my son and his wife believe that love is measured in money. I believed it too, for a long time. I gave until I couldn't anymore, not because I was confused, but because I was a mother." I turned slightly, facing Ethan. I paid for his tuition, his cars, his rent, his life. And when I finally stopped, he decided to convince the world I'd lost my mind. The courtroom went still. I could hear someone's pen drop. I opened the binder I'd brought, the one filled with years of evidence. "Here," I said, handing it to the judge, "is every transfer I made to my son and his wife over the past 15 years. $42,000 in total. And here," I pointed to a page, "are the messages from Mara threatening to cut me off from my family if I didn't keep paying." Mara's head snapped up. Ethan looked pale. The judge flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Monroe, these are thorough. Did you prepare this yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, steady. "I may be old, but I'm not stupid." They thought I was too soft to fight back. They mistook kindness for confusion. The judge leaned back in her chair, then looked at Ethan. "Mr. Monroe, do you have a response?" He stammered. I didn't mean... We just wanted to... To what?" I interrupted gently. "Protect me from my own independence? Or from your guilt?" The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites relationships. When the judge finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of finality. "This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence. In fact, Mrs. Monroe appears perfectly capable of managing her affairs. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, your petition is dismissed with prejudice." Mara's jaw clenched. Ethan's shoulders sagged. And me? I just exhaled. Not in victory, not in relief, just release. The judge looked at me again. "Mrs. Monroe, if you wish to pursue legal action for attempted financial exploitation, you have every right." I met her gaze. "I'll think about it. For now, I just want my peace." Outside the courthouse, Ethan tried to follow me. "Mom, please, I didn't mean for it to..." I stopped him with a look. "You meant every word," I said softly. "You just didn't expect me to remember mine." He looked lost, small, like the little boy I used to carry on my hip. But the sympathy I'd once felt for him was gone. He'd buried it himself. Mara grabbed his arm. "She's making a mistake," she hissed. I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least it's mine to make." That night, I sat by my window again, the city lights flickering like small truths. For the first time in decades, my house felt like mine. Not a bank account, not a lifeline, not an obligation. Mine. I poured a glass of wine and whispered into the quiet, "They tried to take everything. My money, my name, my sanity. But all they did was remind me how much power I still have when I stop giving it away." And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just survival, it was rebirth. Ethan and Mara are humiliated, but humiliation breeds hate. They're not finished. Their final act will come quietly, through gossip, deception, and one last cruel attempt to break her spirit. But Clara has changed. And this time, she's the hunter. It's strange how victory can feel both heavy and hollow. The court had sided with me. The lies had been exposed. But when the noise faded and the papers were signed, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was something colder, a silence that hummed with unfinished business. Because I knew Ethan, and I knew Mara. People like them don't lose quietly. They retreat, they regroup, and then they come back for what they think they still deserve. It started small, whispers in the community. At church, women who once hugged me tight now offered cautious smiles. Neighbors who'd always waved from across the fence now hesitated. Someone even asked, "Clara, are you sure you're all right, living alone at your age?" And I realized they'd started a new campaign. If they couldn't ruin me legally, they'd ruin me socially. They wanted me isolated. They wanted me doubted. At first, I ignored it, but gossip, like rot, spreads fast when left unchallenged. So I decided to do something they'd never expect. I invited them to dinner. Yes, both of them. When Mara answered the phone, her tone dripped suspicion. Dinner? With you? Yes, I said calmly. There are things we need to settle, face to face. She hesitated, then agreed, because greed always takes the bait. I spent that afternoon preparing the meal, roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, and cornbread the way Ethan loved when he was small. The smells filled the house like ghosts of a life I once had, and as I set the table, I looked around and realized every object in this home was a witness. Every chair, every wall, every photograph had seen what love could turn into when poisoned by entitlement. They arrived right on time, dressed for manipulation. Mara in her careful pearls, Ethan in a suit that didn't suit him anymore. He still had that same fake confidence, but his eyes were tired, uncertain. I welcomed them in with a smile that made Mara visibly uncomfortable. Dinner began with polite conversation, the kind that tiptoes around the truth. I let them talk, about their new business, about struggles, about how families should stick together. And then Ethan cleared his throat. Mom, about everything that happened, we've been thinking. Maybe we could start over. I sipped my wine slowly. Start over how? Mara leaned forward, all sugar and venom. We could help manage things. Your property, your finances, properly this time. You can trust us. Trust. The word burned. I smiled faintly. You know, I used to believe trust was something you give, but I've learned it's something you keep until someone earns it. Ethan sighed, his patience thinning. Mom, don't start. We're offering you a chance to make things right. To make things right? I repeated softly. Tell me, Ethan, man, when you stood in that courtroom and called me unstable and was that your idea of making things right? He flinched. Mara's hand tightened around his. Clara, she said, you're holding onto the past. No, dear, I said, meeting her eyes. You're mistaking the past for something buried, but I haven't buried it. I've been keeping it. I reached into the side drawer and pulled out a small recorder, one I'd kept running since the moment they walked in. It blinked red in my palm. Mara froze. Ethan's face went pale. I invited you here, I said calmly, because I wanted to see what you'd do when you thought you were safe. I wanted to hear it. The same manipulation, the same deceit, in your own voices. Ethan shot up from his chair. You can't do that. I already did, I said, pressing stop. And tomorrow my lawyer will have it. Along with the statements from the neighbors you lied to and the texts you sent to smear my name. Mara stood too, her voice trembling with rage. You're crazy, I smiled. That's what you said last time, and look how that turned out. Ethan slammed his hands on the table, his voice breaking. Why are you doing this? You're my mother. I stood, slowly, deliberately. And you were my son, until you decided I was just an obstacle between you and a dollar sign. The room went still. The air felt electric, like something sacred had just been declared. You took my kindness for weakness, I continued. You took my love and turned it into leverage. You tried to take my mind, my freedom, my reputation, and now that you've lost, you want mercy. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in years, Ethan looked like the little boy I used to know. Lost, frightened, and sorry. But sorry doesn't fix broken trust. Get out, I said quietly. They hesitated, and then I said it again, firmer this time. Get out. And this time they listened. When the door shut behind them, I leaned against it and let the silence fill the house. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I poured the last of the wine into my glass and sat down at the table they'd just vacated. The recorder rested beside my plate like a trophy. He wanted to prove I was unfit, I whispered to the empty room. But today, I proved he was unworthy. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a mother holding on. I felt like a woman letting go. Their defeat is total, but temporary. Ethan will spiral and Mara will vanish, leaving behind destruction. When fate brings him back into Clara's life years later, broken and begging, she'll face the final test of strength, forgiveness without surrender. I didn't see Ethan or Mara after that night. No more calls, no texts, no footsteps on the porch pretending to be remorse. They vanished, like ghosts that finally realized they no longer haunted the right house. And for the first time in years, my phone stayed quiet, not with loneliness, but with peace. It's strange how silence can change its meaning over time. Once, it felt like punishment. Now, it felt like freedom. The first thing I did was sell the house, the one Ethan grew up in, the one where every corner carried the echo of sacrifices I could never take back. I listed it without hesitation. When the realtor asked if I wanted to keep the old family photos, I told her, "No, let the walls forget us too." A few weeks later, I packed what was left of my life into 3 boxes: clothes, journals, and the painting my husband had given me before he died. Everything else stayed behind. I bought a small cottage by the sea, 2 hours south of Atlanta. Nothing fancy, just enough space for me, my books, and the quiet. The air smelled like salt and starting over. The day I moved in, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the tide pull at the shore. There was something poetic about it, the ocean, taking what it wanted and giving it back when it chose. Maybe that's what love was supposed to be. Not ownership, just movement. For months, I kept expecting them to reach out again, but they didn't. Not even a message at Christmas. I thought it would hurt, but it didn't. It just confirmed what I'd already learned. Some people only love you for as long as you're useful, and when you stop being their ladder, they leave, because climbing was all they ever came to do. I filled my days with small joys. Morning walks on the sand, a weekly market where I sold homemade jam, afternoons spent painting, clumsy, colorful things that made no sense except to me. Sometimes I'd sit by the window at night and think about how quiet my heart had become. No anxiety, no waiting, no need to be needed. That's the kind of silence I'd prayed for all my life. One evening I was sitting by the fire when my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said I should. "Hello?" A pause, then a hesitant voice I hadn't heard in a long time. "Mom?" "Ethan." My throat tightened, but my tone stayed calm. "Yes?" He hesitated again. I wanted to say hi. "Hi," I said flatly. There was a soft sound, a shaky breath. "I'm sorry. For everything. Mara left. The business failed. I've been trying to fix things, but..." I cut him off gently. "Ethan." He went quiet. "I don't hate you," I said. "But I also don't owe you forgiveness on demand." He didn't speak. I could almost hear his heart breaking through the static. Finally, I said, "Take care of yourself," and I hung up. I put the phone down on the table and stared into the flames. My hands were steady. My heart was still. A few days later, I sent him one last message. "I raised you to stand on your own. I hope one day you finally do." Then I blocked the number, not in anger, but in closure. Now, every morning when I wake up and hear the waves outside my window, I think about the woman I used to be. The one who mistook endurance for love, guilt for loyalty, silence for peace. She's gone, and what's left is someone new. "I thought motherhood was about giving until you disappeared," I whispered one dawn as the sun rose over the water. "But maybe real love begins the day you decide to stay whole." I took a deep breath of sea air and smiled. Freedom didn't roar. It whispered. And for the first time in my life, I listened. Years later, fate will cross their paths one last time, not through money or manipulation, but through a chance encounter that forces Ethan to face what he destroyed, and Clara to decide whether forgiveness is the final form of freedom. They say time heals all wounds. That's not true. Time just teaches you which scars are worth touching and which are better left alone. By the second year in my little seaside cottage, I had stopped counting days by what I'd lost. Instead, I measured life in quiet victories. Mornings without dread, nights without regret. Each no I'd ever whispered became a form of prayer, a small rebellion against the years I'd spent saying yes, just to be loved. The locals in my new town came to know me as Miss Clara from the Cliffs. I liked that. Simple, unburdened by titles like mother or wife. Just me. On Sundays, I'd walk down to the market, buy a loaf of fresh bread, maybe some honey, and listen to the laughter of people who didn't know my past. They didn't see a woman who'd been betrayed. They saw a woman who'd survived. I started painting again. Real painting. Not the hesitant brushstrokes of grief. Bold colors, wide skies, wild oceans. When I looked at my canvas, I realized I was painting how it felt to breathe again. One afternoon, my neighbor, Janice, a retired nurse with a laugh that could shake walls, stopped by for tea. As we sat on the porch, she said, "You're the calmest person I've ever met. What's your secret?" I smiled. "Learning to say no." She laughed. "That's it?" I nodded. "It's harder than it sounds, especially when you've built your whole life on yes." I told her how saying no didn't mean I was bitter. It meant I was done bleeding for people who mistook love for weakness. Janice sipped her tea and said quietly, "You sound like someone who's finally forgiven herself." I thought about that long after she left, forgiving myself. That was the hardest part. Because for years, I blamed me. For raising a son who thought my heart was a wallet. For not seeing what Mara was. For loving them both past reason. But self-blame is a weight that doesn't leave until you stop feeding it. And one morning, as I watched the tide roll in, I realized I'd finally stopped feeding mine. I began writing, not for an audience, but for myself. My story poured out in ink and salt-stained tears. Every page was a confession, every sentence, a release. I wrote about motherhood, how it can become a religion if you're not careful. How sacrifice can turn into self-erasure when you start confusing devotion with dependence. How a woman can spend decades giving, only to realize she's never been seen as a person, just a source. By the time I finished writing, I had 312 pages. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I titled it, "The Year I Learned to Say No." I never meant to publish it. But one evening, while helping Janice clean out her attic, she found a flyer for a local writing contest. "Submit it," she said. "Your story might help someone else find their no." So I did, and 3 months later, it won. Not first place, but an honorable mention. Still, when I stood in that small hall reading my words aloud to a room full of strangers, something shifted inside me. For years, my voice had been something others talked over. That night, it filled the room, and when I finished, people stood and clapped, not because I was some hero, but because I'd told the truth. So many of them were afraid to speak. Afterward, a young woman came up to me, tears in her eyes, clutching her copy of the program. She said, "My mother went through what you did. She never learned to say no. I think it killed her." I touched her hand gently. "Then learn from her silence," I said. "Don't make your love a leash." She nodded, crying harder, and I realized that every bit of pain I'd carried, every betrayal I'd endured, had been preparing me for that moment, to be a warning and a light at the same time. That night, I walked home under a sky that felt wider than it ever had before. The stars were fierce, endless, like tiny reminders that even the darkest spaces hold light. I sat on my porch, pulled a blanket around my shoulders, and whispered to the ocean, "You can lose everything and still end up with yourself. And sometimes that's the best ending there is." The next morning, I wrote one final line in my journal. Peace doesn't come from being loved. It comes from no longer needing permission to exist. And for the first time in my 73 years, I felt completely, beautifully, unapologetically alive. But peace has its own irony. It often arrives right before the past does. And when Clara's past shows up again one gray afternoon in the form of a broken man at the grocery store, she'll learn that strength isn't only about saying no. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away with grace. It had been nearly 5 years since I'd last heard his voice. 5 quiet, unbroken years filled with sea breezes, paint-stained fingers, and mornings that didn't start with fear. I had convinced myself that chapter was closed for good. But life, I've learned, doesn't always close its doors. Sometimes it leaves them slightly ajar, waiting for a gust of fate to push them open. That gust came one gray Tuesday afternoon. The rain had been falling since morning, soft, steady, the kind that made the world smell like wet earth and endings. I'd gone into town for groceries, humming to myself as I picked out fruit and bread. Nothing special, nothing dramatic, just another quiet day in a quiet life. Until I saw him. At first, I didn't recognize him. He was thinner, his shoulders slumped, his clothes mismatched, like someone who hadn't cared for a long time. His hair had more gray than mine, and there was something hollow about his eyes, like light had moved out and never paid rent. He was at the checkout line, fumbling through his wallet, apologizing softly to the cashier, and then he turned, and those eyes met mine. Ethan, my son. For a heartbeat, time folded in on itself. The store disappeared, the noise, the people, the hum of machines, all gone. There was only the boy I used to hold and the man he'd become. He froze. The groceries in his hands trembled. "Mom," he whispered. My first instinct was to walk away. 5 years of healing, 5 years of hard-earned peace. I couldn't risk it for a ghost. But something rooted me to the floor. I walked toward him slowly, every step a battle between love and self-preservation. When I reached him, I stopped just short of arm's length. He looked like he wanted to speak, but his throat couldn't find the words. Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he didn't look like the confident, arrogant man I'd raised. He looked like the frightened little boy who used to cling to my skirt after nightmares. "Mom," he said again, his voice breaking. "I've been trying to find you. I lost everything, the house, the business. Mara's gone. She left 2 years ago. I didn't know where else to go." I studied his face. He wasn't lying. You can always tell when someone's telling the truth. Their shame gets quieter. I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to reach out. But all I felt was distance. Wide, necessary distance. "I see," I said softly. He nodded quickly, desperate. "I know I can't fix what I did. I was stupid. I thought I was protecting us. But I hurt you. I hurt the only person who ever cared." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not asking for money. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." For a long moment, I just looked at him. There was a time when those words would have shattered me, when "I'm sorry" would have been enough to make me forget every wound. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it on the counter beside his groceries. "Get yourself something to eat," I said. He blinked, confused. I didn't mean—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "That's why this isn't charity. It's closure." He looked up, tears spilling down his cheeks. "You really hate me, don't you?" "No," I said quietly. "I don't hate you, Ethan. I just stopped trying to love you in ways that hurt me." He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to live with what I did." "Then learn," I said. "Start there, the same way I had to." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like someone accepting a sentence he knew he'd earned. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered one last time. I gave him a small, sad smile. "I know." And then I turned and walked away. No dramatic music, no tears, just the quiet click of my shoes against the floor and the faint hum of the rain outside, the sound of endings that didn't need to explode to mean something. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. I stood under the awning for a while, breathing in the damp air, feeling the weight of years lift one final time. Maybe forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. Maybe it's about letting yourself walk out, without bitterness, without guilt, without the chains of what-ifs. That night, I sat by my window, watching the rain blur the lights of the town. I poured myself a cup of tea and whispered, "He lost everything, and I found peace. Life has a cruel sense of balance." I took a slow sip and smiled, but I suppose that's how healing works. It doesn't give back what you lost. It gives you the strength to stop needing it. Years of pain have come full circle, but there's one last page in Clara's story, a quiet reflection on legacy, strength, and the lesson she hopes others will learn from the cost of unconditional love. The ocean outside my window is louder these days, or maybe I just finally learned how to listen to it. Each wave rises and falls like a heartbeat, steady, alive, unafraid. I used to think peace was something you found, but peace, I've learned, is something you build. One boundary, one truth, one no at a time. It's been a year since that afternoon in the grocery store. I haven't seen Ethan since. And though sometimes I still wonder where he is, the thought doesn't ache anymore. It simply exists, like a distant scar you only notice when it rains. In the beginning, I thought my story ended with his apology, that forgiveness was the final chapter. But forgiveness, I discovered, isn't the ending. It's the closing of one book so you can finally start writing your own. I spend my mornings walking along the beach, barefoot, my toes sinking into the cool sand. Children play nearby, their laughter rising like songbirds. Their mothers call out reminders, warnings, promises of lunch and safety. Sometimes I stop and watch them, remembering the days when my voice sounded like that. Young, tired, full of devotion and hope. Back then, I thought love was an open door. Now I know it's a gate, one you choose who to let through and when. I started keeping a new journal, not to relive the past, but to leave behind something honest. Not for Ethan, but for whoever comes after. For women like me, who give until they forget themselves. For daughters and mothers and wives who confuse sacrifice for love. On the first page, I wrote, "This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about return, about a woman who came back to herself after a lifetime of being borrowed." I wrote about my mistakes. Every time I mistook silence for peace, obedience for love, giving for strength. And as I wrote, I realized that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to the person you were before the world told you otherwise. Sometimes I still dream about Ethan as a child, his little hands clutching mine, his laughter echoing through the house that no longer stands. In those dreams, he's always smiling. And I wake up smiling too, because I finally understand something I never did before. He was never mine to keep. He was only mine to guide. And maybe I didn't fail him after all. Maybe he had to lose everything to learn the value of what he threw away. Maybe, in his own quiet way, he's learning too. Last month, I donated half my savings to a foundation that helps older women reclaim their independence after financial abuse. When I signed the papers, the woman at the desk said, "This is generous. Are you sure you don't want to keep it for your family?" I smiled. "I'm keeping it for my family," I said, "the one I haven't met yet. Because family, I've learned, isn't blood. It's choice. It's the people who show up without taking. The ones who love you, not for what you give, but for what you are." The sunset outside my window tonight is painted in gold and violet, a masterpiece that asks for nothing and gives everything freely. I sit with my tea, the same cup I've held through grief and triumph, and whisper softly into the light, "He took my money. He took my love, but he never took my peace. That was always mine." The waves answer in rhythm. They're crashing steady and kind. And I realize this isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning of everything I never thought I deserved. Love gave me a son. Pain gave me strength. But learning to love myself, that was the true inheritance.